Well, welcome, friends. It is 7 o'clock on Thursday, October 10th, and we here at the Chelmsford Public Library are so excited to be hosting Peter Mandel for a talk about adventure travel and going to extremes. We are so grateful to have you all in attendance. We're grateful to the Ashland Public Library, Groton Public Library, and Tewksbury Library for partnering with us on this program. If you have a second and you want to pop into the chat and tell us where you're coming from, that would be awesome. And we're also excited that the Chelmsford Friends of the Library were able to sponsor this event. So we're gonna give it a couple more minutes. My name's Marty. I'm from the Chelmsford Library. I work in youth services, but I get to chime in on an adult program tonight, which is so fun to be here with the grown-ups. And as I said, we're so excited to have Peter Mandel here with us tonight. He is a nationally known adventure travel journalist for the Boston Globe, Washington Post, National Geographic, and Los Angeles Times. Um, and as someone who's not very well traveled, I'm really excited to hear about all of the adventurous journeys that Peter has taken. And I hope you all are too. There will definitely be some time at the end for a little bit of Q&A, and I will be monitoring the chat as well to sort of, if there are pauses in the presentation, that we can answer your questions. So with that being said, it looks like people are trickling in. I think I should probably hand this over to Peter, because he's the expert, and we're so looking forward to learning tonight about your experiences.
Oh, terrific. I gotta say, I'm really super impressed with the Chelmsford Library crew and also I think it's Groton, Tewksbury, and Ashland. I could be getting those wrong, but what an amazing job of promotion. I think there are, believe it or not, 330 something people listening in tonight. And so bear with us, please. One of the things I've been doing, going to extremes talk for, gosh, it's 14, 15 years now. And what's really important to me is that you guys feel that you're getting your questions responded to, and that if you have a comment about a slide or something, that place where you've gone, a question about travel writing, I'm hoping, I'm going to keep 15 minutes at the end for those. And if you want to pepper us with chat questions during the slides, that's fine too. Okay. And remind me, I guess you won't be able to since this is a webinar, but I'll give you my website address at the very end in case there are lingering things you want to talk about. It's Peter Mandel with 1L.net, and I'll mention that again. So we have about an hour and 15 minutes, and a lot to look at. So let's get to it. Sharing screen here. I'm hoping everyone can see this. It looks like a walrus. It's not a walrus. This is an elephant seal. This is Antarctica. We're going to see some pictures of Antarctica. It's probably the most extreme destination we humble human beings can travel to before space becomes, the new frontier of adventure travel, which it will. In fact, it's already starting a little bit, but hopefully, do you see this, Marty? This big.
Yes, it looks
Yes. Okay.
great.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. All right. So in a nutshell, what you're going to be seeing tonight are mostly they're all photos that I've taken to go with travel articles that I've written the past 25 years or so. An old school kind of guy. Most of my work has been for newspaper travel sections. Remember those? They're sadly, very sadly, many of us, newspapers are in trouble. Boston Globe is hanging in there pretty well in your area. Most of what you see here on the screen, these are some of the articles I've written for mostly for the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, LA Times, and National Geographic Kids. My other universe as a writer is I write children's picture books as well. Grew up in Manhattan. My mom and dad were both writers for the old Life magazine, if anyone remembers Life. Um, Went to Middlebury College in Vermont and on to Brown University for an MFA in creative writing. By the way, that's not something, if you're a travel writer, if you want to be a writer, do you need a credential? You do not. It's a really good aspect of writing. If you can do it and do it interestingly, do it differently, and make it fresh and new, um, and excite editors and readers, that's all it takes. So I know it's a little brisk today, but we're sorry to tell you we're starting cold. We're not looking at Antarctica here. We're looking at the opposite pole. We're in the high Arctic. These are obviously icebergs, ice flows, and this is very unusual looking cruise ship, but it is a cruise ship. This is um, a cruise to the high Arctic and Greenland. I did this story, I think it was for the Baltimore Sun, quite a number of years back. Um, and just one of the many, many unusual aspects of sailing into the high Arctic and visiting Greenland is you can't obviously take a regular, normal, Caribbean style cruise ship to get there. And my wife and I are not folks who really, our way of vacationing is almost never to take a Caribbean cruise, although who doesn't, enjoy pleasant cocktails on the deck and beautiful beach? That's all terrific. And we will chat with folks who will say they have no interest in going anywhere by ship at all. I said, well, you may be a little bit like us. However, one of the things I think folks don't necessarily realize is there's a whole world of adventure cruises out there. Ships that are outfitted to take you and to take those of us who write about travel to climates and destinations that you couldn't get to otherwise in the same fashion. What this cruise line called, it's actually an adventure travel outfitter called Quark. What their brilliance is, instead of building multi-million dollar cruise ships, Quark outfits and refits working vessels. In this case, they took a former Soviet icebreaker. That's what you're looking at. This is an icebreaker. Hate to bring the Russians into this talk at all due to all the horrible stuff that's going on in Ukraine. This is many years ago. This is a former Soviet ship, still staffed by Russians. Didn't speak a lot of English. The food was Russian. I don't know if you've had Russian food before. Not my favorite. Sometimes, I'll do this talk in person, so I'll always ask folks, well, what's this big box thing for? That was added to the ship. And, sometimes people raise their hand and say, is that where you slept? And the answer is yes. These are the cabins. Looks a little bit like Rikers Island prison, but much more ship shape than it looks. Perfectly comfortable, though not, it's not like a crystal cruise, not fancy. Um, every single day, to our surprise, many of us thought, well, we're going to the high Arctic, going to Greenland. A lot of our lives for 2 weeks will be staying aboard the cozy ship. But one of the great things about most adventure cruises is that you get off the ship every day, almost every day. In this case, we passengers lined up twice a day. You see us in our Quark day glow parkas, waiting for a helicopter to helicopter us around to have a look at walruses and big floating icebergs, things like that. Um, that's another thing to keep in mind if you're an adventurous traveler and you're thinking that, oh, well, I don't want to take a cruise, it'll be too sedentary. Even when you're going to extreme destinations, most cruise lines and other tour companies will have excursions, constant excursions. How do they do it? Um, Many of you, I'm just betting you're a pretty well traveled audience. Of you probably have experienced this where you're on a ship and the tender, the small boat that gets you to shore for your excursion, um, is sometimes nothing more than a rubberized, inflatable. It's called a Zodiac boat. That's the brand name with an outboard motor. So that adds a little adventure, especially if you're in a cold climate. This is port in Greenland. These are actually quite massive icebergs out here in the bay. We were in this tiny little town called Kanak, Greenland. I know Iceland has become a major destination for travelers lately. Um, Greenland, not so much. Even back, this is more than 10 years ago that I did this piece. Even back at that point, the glaciers were starting to melt massively. Really, really, it's one of the sort of frontiers of global warming. Anyway, guides were starting to notice, hey, wait a minute, how come there's no leftover snow, dirty snow up here? Um, some of us passengers were, on shore for the day, so we asked the locals what would be the best restaurant to have lunch. And locals, this is a town which has 30,000 sled dogs and about 5,000 people. Um, Probably not a lot of restaurants, but they all suggested the Polar Grill. So we hiked up. You can't read this sign, but I'm sorry to say, we were sorry to discover that the sign said closed for the season. And we're thinking, okay, or very good, fair enough. What is the high season here in Greenland? Anyway, we're staying cold for just one more series. Bear with me. Oh, that's a pun. Unintended. The only puns I ever make are ones where I'm not thinking about it. I'll take some chat questions in a few minutes if Marty's still around. But we're staying very cold for another series. This is no longer the high Arctic. It's not Greenland. This is a pretty accessible adventure trip if you're interested in seeing polar bears in the wild. Uh, every now and then, I have an audience member, not often, every now and then, I have an audience member who's heard of a little northern Manitoba town in Canada called Churchill. Churchill is sort of does one thing, and that is host host travelers who fly up there from Winnipeg. And that could be you, and these are folks like me who want to get up close and personal with polar bears. Polar bears, this is a mother and her cub. Polar bears, as you may know, are among the most endangered uh, large animals that exist. Um, and what you'll do if you decide this is the adventure trip for you is you'll fly up to this little town and board what's essentially a train. It's a tundra train. Um, Not many folks have been on one. Instead of running on tracks, the tundra train up here by Hudson Bay in the late fall trundles around on huge ATV tires. um, what's the point of living on this train, which has, you're looking at the caboose here. What's the point of living on this train for a week or two? You've got your dining car, you've got your lounge car, got a bunk car, you've got a bath and shower car. Um, the beauty of it is this train can go anywhere on the tundra and get very close. In fact, cheek by jowl, come back to that shot. You see these constant parade of different polar bears. Here you see um, again, global warming was already reducing snow levels. Our guides were like all upset about that, but you essentially bears cluster around you day after day after day. Um, some folks, I'm sure many of you have ridden Amtrak quite a bit. My wife and I ride it all the time from New York, and we go down to visit my family. You know how Amtrak has those sort of metal plates in between cars. Our tundra train for this trip had gratings, metal gratings in between cars, and the polar bears like nothing better than to lick the gratings right under your boots. And I think somebody asked the guide, well, why are they so interested? Is it the human smell? And I remember a guide saying it's actually partly that, but partly salt, because in the North Country, as many of us realize, salt is everywhere. The tundra train has to go get gas and stuff like that, like any other vehicle. This is a young me. Uh, like any tourist, even though I'm writing for the Boston Globe here, like I really always looking as far hard as I can for some good souvenir shot. I knew my editor was not going to use this, but I was hoping to find a sign that said alert, warning, polar bears. And the only place, because the folks of Churchill, way up north, are so used to living with bears that the only place I could find any kind of warning at all, absurdly, was at the town dump. And so at least I got my shot. And, when I'm in person, I'm always asked why the town dump? Why were bears more, dangerous there? And again, I don't know if your part of Massachusetts has any kind of bear issues. Rhode Island doesn't have a lot, but Connecticut, where I do talk, sometimes has a lot of bears who can, you know, like to invade garbage cans and local dumps and stuff like that. Um, so again, this is a trip that if you don't mind being extremely, extremely cold and you want to go on safari, this is a not too far away, not too expensive safari. This is how I ended up combining my writing about visiting polar bears in the wild with another trip I took down to the very tip of South America, Tierra del Fuego, where there are a lot of very typically southern wildlife, including tons of penguins. So this was just as an aside for we humble travel writers. Um, a good moment. If your story gets on the front page, this is the front page of Boston Globe travel section. So you get paid more when that happens. And there's also, I had a really good editor I was working for at the time at the Globe. And it was just fun for me that he commissioned this cool cartoon art for the story. Um, so if you're there, Marty, any questions and stuff about all this freezing cold?
Yes. So can you hear me okay, Peter?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, great. So, we had a question from Barbara asking, what is the price of this kind of a trip?
Um,
Um,
it's a really good question. You've got to look it up now, because again, I did this more than a decade ago, so it'll be radically different. Google polar bear safari. Natural Habitat was the company I took. Okay, so that'll be the best way to answer that. Okay.
Awesome. And then let's see. There was also a question about did you take all of the photographs, or did you have someone with you taking them, or
Okay, great question. There are times, and you'll see a couple of examples, I think, in this batch of slides. There are times when a newspaper or magazine will send a photographer, either a staffer or another freelancer, because they want super professional, shots. Mostly for us newspaper, largely newspaper guys, that's me. Um, part of the job really is trying to capture what you're seeing in the graphic way as well as in print. And the more shots your editor likes, the more they actually, it's a separate contract. If you can sell more photos to your editor, then you make more of the pittance you otherwise would make.
right? Um, there was one request to if you could speak a little bit louder. I guess
Oh,
somebody
okay,
was having trouble hearing you.
okay.
And then there was one more question about the photography equipment and how has it changed? What do you now use for camera gear?
Okay, well, everything's moved to, for me anyway, to iPhones. I'm not a guy who happens to like phones, but I've discovered my wife carries her iPhone like a normal human being. I'm resistant. I like being separate and having some distance when I travel. But I've learned that when I borrowed her iPhone, I know this may annoy some people, it may please others. I've just learned that the quality, at least for newspaper reproduction, is it's really good. There's no I wanted to resist it, but um, before I kind of like started, using somebody else's phone, I used to use a point and shoot camera. I've never been one for heavy equipment, just because I've always needed to move quickly and not be encumbered. Okay, so we'll take some more questions in a few minutes. Moving to hot, heat, humidity, very thick air, totally different climate. You can tell by the rainbow, you can tell that thunderstorm has just moved through. We're in a tropical place. Where could it be? We are on the Amazon River, which, again, like something we learn about in geography at school and think it just sounds exotic, and turns out that it isn't that it isn't one of the harder adventure trips for you to get down there. Um, you're going to have to take a few flights. You're going to fly to Sao Paulo in Brazil and then change planes and into the Brazilian jungle town of Manaus. And why would you do this? Because this is just a trip that stays with me a lot. I think about it because of the stuff I saw. Um, you get to, if you're interested, take a beautifully locally made riverboat down the Amazon and its very wild cousin, the Rio Negro, even wilder than the Amazon. I don't have time to get into the details. It's air conditioned, it's beautifully designed, made out of Brazilian hardwood. The food is perfectly good. You're up on the top deck in the evening having Brazilian favorite cocktail is called a caipirinha, sort of like a mojito. But squadrons of literally thousands of parrots are soaring overhead in the evening. Remember, I mentioned that you're on adventure cruises. Good ones will take you constantly to hike around on shore. This case, we had a little skiff, motorized skiff, taking us for hikes in the jungle. I love to ask attendees, well, what this is a local ship, I'll ask, what is it used for? Since we're a webinar tonight, I'll answer my own question. This is actually a church, like a place like Venice. Everything, every working things that would be trucks in the U.S. are boats in Venice, fire boats, funeral boats. delivery boats because everything's a canal. Here on the Amazon, um, even the church is a boat, and much of this area was sort of missionaries came down here centuries ago and converted folks. So the priest, believe it or not, actually sails from village to village to give services. This typical town along the Amazon. Notice gosh, could we learn from this? Yeah, you think? Um, every house and every building in the local village is up on stilts. Why is that? Simply because there's flooding at least twice a year. Also, my wife, my wife is not a fan of bugs or snakes, so she said, "Well, wouldn't it help keep the bugs and snakes out?" And I asked the guide, and he said, "Yeah, it does." Um, so these are just locals who are selling these necklaces. Um, it's just I bought one for Kathy for my wife, and I was looking at it closely on the way back and realizing that I had no idea what these speckled ovals were, and figured it out. Finally, I asked somebody, and they said, "Those are rubber tree nuts." I haven't tried I haven't tried planting rubber tree here in Rhode Island where I live, but one of the cool things about hiking around in the Brazilian jungle is you pass natural rubber trees constantly. You can take your pocket knife out and slice into them, and they bleed white rubber. Very cool. Most fun of all on the Amazon was got to go fishing for these guys. I'm old enough to remember, gosh, there used to be this show. I'm sure I'm dating myself. There used to be a show called Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Marty won't remember it, but it was all about, one of the hosts would go on adventures, do adventurous stuff, like get stuck in quicksand, and we kids were just like in thrall of these adventures. I remember Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, one show about piranhas. That's what you're looking at. So we tourists got to fish for piranha using. It was really a bizarre experience, but the chef on the riverboat let us use pieces of steak. I'm not making this up. Pieces of steak from the dinner we'd had the night before fishing, and some woman, actually, she was from somewhere in Mass, had never fished before, and she ended up catching something like 38, uh, 38 piranha, and the chef actually cooked up a few of the piranha so we could taste them. This is strange, very strange at how skinny these guys are. I'm not a fisherman. It's not my hobby. I'm a guy who likes to play tennis or watch baseball. But um, the fishermen were just a little astonished on the trip. They were just like, how can they be eating piranhas? As you may have read, eat. They're carnivores, and they eat. If a cow falls into the river, they'll eat them pretty quickly. So you'd think they'd have more meat on their bones. Um, I'm going to do another series, then I'll ask for more questions. We're going to take a little side trip into the Islamic world. I know we're in very difficult times right now, and um, there's a lot going on in the Middle East. One of the things that I've been lucky enough to learn in traveling and writing about travel, and my wife has been able to come on some trips too, so she's found this interesting as well, that a lot of Americans are afraid to travel to Muslim countries, and certainly there's danger everywhere we go. um, but one of the things we found kind of fascinating is that many Muslim countries have this tradition of welcome that I had never read about, I never knew about. So I'm going to take a little sojourn to a few of these places. This is Jordan, which happens to be an ally of the U.S. It's has a peace treaty with Israel. Hope that can hold. This is just a local guy on his horse on the outskirts of one of the world's great sites. You'll see it in a minute. To get to this great site, you've got to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours hiking through, it's not difficult terrain, but you hike through a wind carved cavern called the Seek. That my photo, I tried, it just doesn't do justice to the incredible colors of the rock itself. This is the moment where you first see the preserved ancient city of Petra. Um, Very hard to describe this place, but desert air is so dry um, that it's preserved a city almost perfectly. And this is the moment where you as a tourist first sight it. This actual photo was used in the Boston Globe. This happens to me. I didn't ask her permission. This is my wife Kathy here. And she was like, "Wait a minute, I had just appeared in the Boston Globe without you telling me." I think she's gotten over it. I hope. I'm not sure where she got this pith helmet. To me, she seems a little bit like I don't know, like a female Indiana Jones, about to embark on an adventure. Um, so that's just a little taste of Jordan. Um, People sometimes ask me, well, they'll say, what is the most overall exotic um, country that you've traveled to? It's hard. Like somebody asks you that, you'd have a tough time with it. I usually will say Morocco, and again, kind of hard to describe, but it's beautiful and exotic in so many different ways. The architecture, the food, the crafts, um, just so much that's stunning. It's just a little bit of old world meets new. This is Marrakesh, Morocco, looking out at the Atlas Mountains. It's another thing about Morocco. Again, it's a friendly, peaceful place if you're worried about going there. And you also get to take a little trip back in time because you'll still see people using donkeys to get around and pull carts and things like that. Another cool thing about Morocco is it's got a whole bunch of different climates in the same country. So you've got mountains, you've got desert. There's a town called, I always mispronounce it, Essaouira by the coast. That's a beautiful seacoast area. Um, the cities, the villages, the towns in Morocco. This is my wife Kathy and our friend Martha. Um, you kind of feel like you're in the movie Casablanca, which uh, not a bad place to be, full of adventure and wonder, um, because you're constantly, yes, getting lost and wandering through these tight little alleys and streets, and you're hearing the call to worship numerous times a day. No more exotic sound to me exists. No human-made sound for those of us who are Westerners. Architecture, again, it's up. Everyone has different tastes. I just happen to like this style, Moorish, uh, Middle Eastern style architecture. Here's a photography moment. I don't know if anyone cares. Um, I don't know. We travel writers sometimes. I don't know. Photography can be like a hobby for us. Not only it's part of the way we make a living, but we also really feel good when we luck out and take a good shot. This is just a moment where I lucked out, caught um, somebody's foot going into a hotel. The colors just kind of worked out in the lighting for me anyway. My editor liked it. The colors that you see in some parts of the Middle East are just stunning. I'm into colors, I admit it. The turquoise. If you're familiar with French at all, the word turquoise really just means Turkish color. It's French word, turquoise. The sort of pinks, the greens, very beautiful. In when I'm in person, I'll always ask any clues in this picture where we are. Um, Usually people pick up we're in Egypt. Those are the Great Pyramids. Don't have time to tell you too much about camel rides. Um, Boy, I don't if you've done it, you probably still feel the feeling of soreness. I can still feel it. Uh, Egypt is again friendly place. I would say this that some of the sites are, when people use the word awe-inspiring, think sometimes it's a little it doesn't fit exactly what you're seeing. Egypt, I gotta say, um, I was lucky enough to was doing a story, I think, for Canada's Globe and Mail. Uh, I got to go down the Nile on a small cruise ship. Getting off in temples like Luxor or this is Karnak Temple, the sheer size of the ruins in Egypt startled me. And, besides being a travel writer, I'm a tourist as well. I was just kind of stunned. And the hieroglyphics, because again, of the dry air, are so beautifully preserved. It's, again, you feel like, you're in a Hercule Poirot. I think there was I'm sorry, I'm digressing into PBS, but Kathy and I like to watch PBS detective stuff, and Hercule Poirot, I think, went down the Nile on one of those. Anyway, back to our slides. Last bit on Islam. If you're nervous about it or you need a jumping off place, Istanbul is kind of like a Paris. It's a perfect bridge between it is a bridge, literally, between Europe and Asia. It stands right at that key point. It's really an amazing city full of the exotic and the familiar blended together, and such beauty and interest. Um, this is how one of the stories. You've seen a bunch of different Middle Eastern destinations. I'm just showing you how one of them ended up. One of my pieces. This is again Boston Globe cover of the travel section. You can see the photo that I showed you. My wife and I are super duper lucky. She used to work for a huge American company, tax accountants, KPMG, Pete Marwick. So she once lucky enough, her a partner gave allowed her to take a transfer to the Paris office for a couple of years. So she and I couldn't say no, and got to live in Paris for a couple of years. And so on this piece, I ended up since other travel writers are maybe different, but my whole gig, my whole driving force is to try to figure out ways to write about travel that haven't already been done a million billion times. So in this case, I uh, wrote about some of the reminders of France that we found in Morocco. So that was just my take on it. Before we move on, if we have a few questions, I don't know if Marty's around.
Yes, I'm
There you are,
here.
Marty. Okay.
And this is perfect timing because I'll have to go do a round in
Okay.
a
Yeah.
minute. But we had a couple of questions. One was Carol was asking what the piranha tasted like.
I love it. It didn't taste good. It was, and I'm not going to say chicken. Didn't taste like chicken. It was like a much fishier tasting haddock or something. Um, so I don't know if you remember eating bad frozen fish when you were a kid. A little like that. Good question.
That is a good question. And then there was another food question.
Mhm.
Barbara was asking what kind of food did you eat when you were in the Middle East?
Oh gosh, all different kinds. So there's so much. good food in the Middle East, and I'm sure you can find some around where you guys live. But just as an example, someday I'd really like to write about breakfasts around the world. I'm not a morning guy at all. I don't, I'm not a breakfast person, but you're on a trip, you're getting up, you have a day ahead of you. Every different culture has a completely different idea about what you should eat to start the day. In the Middle East, it's really beautiful breakfast. If my wife and I just really bonded with it because instead of like bacon or eggs or cereal, it's incredible, like fresh pita, cucumbers, tomatoes, olives, hummus, some olive oil, and if you're into it, there are dates and raisins and things like that, and yogurt. So a whole different, feeling and very fresh. Love that question.
That sounds delicious. And then let's see, I think there were two other questions. Oh, one person was asking about the polar bears, if you don't mind jumping back.
Sure, sure.
Um, if it was normal for them to be so thin as they are in the pictures, and did you see any baby polar bears when you were there?
Yeah, so it's the time of year thing. Yes, they are thin because they are gathering. I should have added this in. They're gathering, waiting for Hudson Bay to freeze, for winter hunting. This is their big hunt. And polar bears like to sort of float on ice floes, and they're great swimmers, and then they hunt seals that way. So yeah, they are kind of thin because they're waiting for their annual hunting season to begin. And we didn't see any baby polar bears just because I guess guide said, it's just not the season for babies, late fall. Um, Anything else?
Yes, one more
Mhm.
question about health precautions that you take
Mm.
when you're visiting a foreign country. Do you worry about extra vaccinations, water, food, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I should be better than I am. My wife would be a good person to answer this question. Um, some of this depends. Yes, to do the right thing, you really should go to a travel clinic. Is there a travel clinic that your medical provider um, everything depends on your insurance. Is there a travel clinic where these vaccinations and, like malaria pills will be covered? And these things can cost, I've discovered as a humble guy trying to, make ends meet, can cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, foolishly and sadly. So I've often skipped things like bringing malaria pills or taking the shots that I should have taken to go to certain parts of the world. But by all means, do check that out for yourself. Okay, don't be a don't be a guy who's lucking out like me. All right, we got to move on. Sorry, just because I
Great.
don't want to.
I just want to let you know I have to do a quick round of the building, but I should be back by the time the next questions
You're
are.
also a night watch person, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, very good. All right, we're doing another detour, guys. You're gonna have whiplash, I'm sure. This is a little a detour into the world of commercial flying. Like any guy who travels, I've always kind of wondered how all of it works so smoothly. Um, these are big metal objects that somehow get off the ground and zoom around safely all over the world and land safely, and they're full of people and pets and drinks and all the rest. So convinced an editor of the Boston Globe to do a series on getting behind the scenes, if I could, of commercial flight. Problem was, this was a bit after 9/11. My editor said, I'm not going to do this with you. I'm not going to run your pieces unless you can fly in the cockpit and see what goes on up there. So if you remember after 9/11, it's still the case. You, an average person, whether you're a writer or not, is not allowed up there. Cockpits are locked. Finally, though, this is a young me um, getting close and up close and personal with an Airbus A320. Finally, the airline Frontier Airlines, based in Denver, had an idea. They kind of wanted the publicity, so they said, "You know what, Peter? How about this? We will fly you over to Germany near Frankfurt, where a new Airbus A320 is being built for our airline, and you can fly back on it in the cockpit because the only people on the plane will be the pilot, the co-pilot, and there were some flight attendants with us as well. So I got to tour, the plant where Airbuses are made. That was very cool. Um, the flying back in the cockpit, what an experience. This is we're actually in flight over the Atlantic. Oh boy, hard to describe. But you know how you know how like you get a new car and there's plastic on the seats. Well, um, here we're boarding this brand new Airbus plane. This, there are plastic, believe it or not, plastic slip covers over all the airline seats. Um, in the cockpit itself, um, I was strapped into a jump seat, not surprisingly, behind the pilot. Um, and, a couple of things surprised me. The pilot didn't put his seatbelt on. They were eating fast food up there, but this wasn't a normal flight. Also, got a little interesting lecture. They had to give me this little lecture. I think they were smirking while they did that if we had any kind of crash landing, what was I to do? If the pilot and the co pilot became stiff and motionless, what I was to do, they showed me, I'm not making this up, I included in my story, they showed me a coiled rope and a pickaxe. So, what I was supposed to do was literally chop through the window of the cockpit and rappel down from the cockpit to the ground. Luckily, that never happened, so I didn't have to test my skills. Um, Another part of this story, and this is another good experience. I'm not I'm not a business owner or CEO or anybody who's ever had a chance to fly in a private jet, but for this story, I got to do that. So I got to fly from where my wife and I live in Providence to JFK in New York on this this private jet. This is the kind of fake um, welcome. Every private jet company is going to give you this little respectful greeting. I don't have a lot of time to get into the details, but the a lot of surprising things about private air travel, which some of you may know. You can, this shocked me that you're allowed to wander up and chat with a pilot and a co pilot. That surprised me there wasn't more security. Excellent snacks and delicious 30-year-old scotch and all of that. So definitely a luxury experience. But there were, some aspects that as a typical economy traveler, that's me, I was a little bit surprised by the lack of security in a small jet. Um, anyway, so I this is just I include this shot. This is my late dad, Paul Mandel, who I may have mentioned. He was a staff writer, then an editor for the old Life magazine in the 1960s. He's probably I include him only because he's the guy who probably got my interest peaked to be somebody writing and somebody writing about adventure. Dad was a Navy guy, but then when he wrote for Life, he had the beat of covering the earliest space shots. He wrote the Life magazine article when John Glenn orbited the Earth. He covered the early space program. He died when I was 8, so this just showing a couple of shots of him helps me remember him. Here in this story, these are Life magazine shots. He's actually testing out a very early prototype of the Apollo mission capsule. And here Dad is visiting Mission Control in Houston. All of us of a certain age, I think, remember getting up early for the excitement of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions, and the countdown, all of that was a big part of your life, and a big part of mine as well. Um, we're taking another sojourn here, another detour. We're on safari, an unusual safari. Well, before we go on to see any animals, these are local kids in the country of Uganda. Lots of horrible political stuff going on there that I won't get into, but the average people in Uganda are really kind and speak excellent English. These are just school kids, and I love their uniform and the smiles. But I got my editor at the Washington Post to agree to let me try to go on safari in Africa somewhere where there are fewest possible fences between tourists and animals and the fewest possible guns. So Uganda was our choice. This is a white rhino sanctuary. Gotta love the sign. We thought, I was with a bunch of other writers and photographers. We thought there's got to be somebody with a gun protecting us. We're allowed to wander around with these rhinos. Can still remember one of the rhinos pawing and snorting at one of the photographers, and the photographer asked, our guide had no weapon. He was a guy who weighed about 90 pounds, and I remember his name, Opio Raymond. And the reporter or the photographer said, "What shall we do if one of these rhinos charges us?" And he thought about it for a minute, and then he said, "You should climb a tree." So we looked around and was like, one tree, okay. Um, oh boy. So this is our lodge in Uganda. One of the most exciting things about staying in this lodge is the sight and sound of wild animals all around you. However, please remember all these animals really are wild. Would be most unwise to approach them closely, feed, or tease them. Um, it's hard to see. This is actually a hippo. Um, so being a reporter, I asked at the desk, well, how come you guys had to put this sign up? Apparently, an Australian tourist had decided to he'd had too many Foster's loggers, and he decided to try to ride a hippo, um, and came very close to being trampled. Um, you may know this or you may not. These are hippos wallowing this is the Nile River again. It goes through Uganda. But I didn't know this before I first went to Africa. But hippos kill by far more humans than any other wild animal in Africa. It's not even close. And I remember guides always telling us, do not get closer than 20 yards to any water. I'm in a boat photographing them from here, so perfectly safe. But um, remember asking, hippos look like they're large and they wouldn't move very quickly. The first guide I had in Africa, I remember somebody asked, well, what could a hippo do to us? And I had a Swiss guide, and the guide whipped around and he said, he will bite you in half. Um, and as it turns out, that there's a greeting card and a poster image of a hippo with its mouth open. You may have seen this, and looks like broken molars or something. That's actually, according to guides, that's an aggressive stance. Again, this is Uganda. Just a shot that worked, I thought. A bunch of impala and kudu and some elephants in the background. At one point, who knows why, the Ugandan government sent soldiers along with us travel writers. I think they thought we were writing political stories or something. Soldiers were very mild mannered types, it turned out. This guy's just looking, he'd never seen a picture of himself before, so he's having a look. Elephant. I think we're all learning more and more every day, every month, every year about their their lives and how human-like and intelligent elephants are. Um, you probably read that when a member of the herd dies, they often have what seem for all the world to be like funerals. Um, Remarkable, remarkable, and wonderful creatures. Um, Lions, for many people in Africa, that's the sort of holy grail. Um, it's much easier to find female lions in Africa. Why is that? Well, kind of like, I wish my wife was here now so I could get credit, but it's kind of like human life. The female lions do, yep, drum roll, please. They do most of the work. They do most of the hunting, in fact. So the men, just like we human guys, we're often slumbering, taking a nap in the bush, drinking a can of Budweiser or something. Meanwhile, the females are bringing up the cubs and hunting. Um, this guy never once, this is a male, obviously, he never once looked at our safari vehicle. He was that disinterested. That's how fascinated he was with. I think he probably had his lunch. So, giraffe, if you've ever, seen them in the wild, they're curious. They're curious. They'll come shuffling near you, but then they'll sort of skitter away. Very beautiful creature. These sometimes people will guess leopards. These are actually cheetah. The world's, as most people know, these are the world's fastest land animal. I like to give this as a quiz, but we don't. We're not in a live Zoom. I like to ask people who can guess why cheetah have this kind of black mascara under their eyes. The hint I like to give is cheetah are among the very few cats that hunt during the daytime. Anyway, I didn't know this before I traveled. This is in Kenya. Um, but just like baseball players and football players sometimes put blacking to cut glare under their eyes, this is sort of nature's way of cutting glare. How about that? Um, I know we're moving quickly. I just want to be sure we don't miss out. We have until about 8:15, 8:20. Um, Another very, very life-changing trip if you're considering going to Asia. um, I had total misconceptions about this place. It's Japan. Um, oh gosh, as a New Yorker, I thought it was going to be hustle bustle. It was going to be like Times Square in the 70s. I thought people would push and shove and all of that. And boy, was I wrong. I ended up doing a story for the Washington Post on, again, I like to try to focus my stories and make them different. I didn't wear a straw hat or straw sandals, but my story was based on hiking an ancient. Japan is crisscrossed with some very ancient paths that shoguns used to use and other travelers. And this one's called the Nakasendo, and it goes through the mountains from Kyoto to Tokyo. So with this group, we actually hiked, like for 5 days between those two major cities. Um, Boy, what an experience! I don't know if you've ever hiked through bamboo forests before. Just the sound of them clicking together in the wind. They're quite beautiful as well, but the sound was quite eerie. We're looking at Mount Fuji from our hike. Um, so I include this picture. One of the true surprises and wonders of Japan is that, with all the grab, as people in the West nowadays, we're all about, let's grab let's get we don't order our food, we grab our takeout, and we're assertively um, living our lives in every possible way. Whereas a place like Japan, you're suddenly thrust into this world where manners and courtesy are still paramount. And it's such a wonderful surprise when people don't turn around and leave a room when you're in it. They'll often back away, bowing. Cab drivers will wear white gloves. Um, so quite an experience, and I wish I had more time on it. But so promised Antarctica. This is we've seen the we've seen, at least in slides, the top of the world. Now we are at the very bottom. Tourists could not visit Antarctica before the late 1960s. Um, you have to happily did so. You have to take a hardened ship from the very southern tip of South America. You cross very, very rough water for several days, and seeing, you end up feeling like you are essentially a space traveler in some ways. The colors, I always thought ice was maybe white or shiny, as you can see in this kind of hazy shot. It's often beautiful blue. Penguins are often riding on icebergs and jumping off to swim. Even the sky looks like something you might imagine seeing on Venus, doesn't it? Um, this is my sort of postcard shot that you saw at the beginning. This is an elephant seal, like going to the Galapagos. If you've been there or thought about that, Antarctica, you got to be really careful because the animals haven't evolved the normal fear of humans. So, you can walk up to pretty much any animal. You obviously don't want to do that. Is mentioned, this is a Zodiac boat which will be taking passengers ashore shortly. This is crew setting up a shore excursion. These are icebergs. Um, Up close and personal with a with an elephant seal. I switched to for those of you who are into photography. This is still in the day of film. Remember film? I switched to black and white here just because I thought it might work. It's a moment where the captain of our ship was kind enough to sail our ship, the Endeavor, as far as it would go into a frozen bay in Antarctica. So we passengers, here we are disembarking, would have the really eerie experience of being able to walk entirely, almost entirely, around the hull of our ship. We played a little ice soccer out there. That was quite a cool, fun thing. Penguins. It's a king penguin. Um, Gosh, I thought before going down to Antarctica, I might get lucky and see, gee, I don't know, 20, 30 penguins. You land in different bays and see literally cities of 20,000, 30,000 penguins. Um, Quite amazing. Do penguins smell good? I would say they don't, but they probably think we don't smell too good either, but they're funny and beautiful and interesting. Um, so to end with, I'll just show you guys a few oddball stories that I've done that have nothing to do with the slides, and then we'll take questions. Um, Again, I'm sort of like, my reputation as a travel writer is, oh, Mandel, right? He's the guy who goes on nutty adventures, or he's the regular guy who tries to do some really strange thing that no one else has tried, and that's me. In this piece for the Boston Globe, thanks to a great editor who was open to this idea, I hiked a strip mall. Um, to make a long story short, you may not have noticed or you may not care, but strip malls have their own weird landscaping and weird topography and geography. So the Globe actually, this is a case where the Globe sent a photographer along. This is done in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, just to capture the topography of a strip mall of all things. Um, and oops, this is a piece for the Washington Post. Used to have this series called The Insider, dispatches from behind the scenes of the travel industry. Boy, did that fit in with my world. In this case, I was got to be trained and became a theme park character for one day. This is actually me in the suit of Patrick the Starfish. This is at King's Dominion theme park in Virginia, and good grief, what an experience! I brought a little mini thermometer in there, and it's 106 degrees inside, these character suits. Your eyes fog up. You have to use your eyes to walk. Another thing I learned was around me. I knew this when I was being trained. Are Believe it or not, there any theme park like Disney, there are handlers disguised as regular tourists watching the characters like Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck or Patrick or SpongeBob to be sure that we don't say or do anything that the character shouldn't be doing. That was news to me. On the plus side, little kids want to give you a hug, and that's very sweet. Some little kids, one kid sucker punched me kind of in the ribs. That wasn't so sweet, but it's a good experience for me. Um, and last but not least, I don't know if you've tried this for the Washington Post. I once took Greyhound straight through from Washington, D.C. to L.A. Um, would I recommend this? I would say I would not. There was a time I think I've talked to some folks who used to take Greyhound buses in the back of the 60s and the late 50s and stuff. And they used to have all these nice cafeterias, and I think things used to be more pleasant. To make a long story pretty short, nowadays it's kind of a a battle of changing buses in bus stations in 3 a.m. and eating all your meals at not even McDonald's and Burger King, but they to save I don't know, or maybe they've gotten kickbacks from Jack in the Box and Hardee's and really forgotten about fast food chains. So by the time you're you're done with your trip, you're pretty much ready to get off. Um, I promised, and I just wanted to mention in case we don't have time to take your question, but here is my website. You can email me through the website, or you can scribble down or do a screenshot of my email. So I welcome comments, questions, etc. Marty, Marty, are you around?
Yes, I
Great.
am here.
Got a
Yes,
few questions.
we do. Donnie asked, how many countries have you visited?
You know, I It's a great question, and a friend just asked me that the other day. I'm embarrassed to say that I don't know. um, so I should count. I do have, several passports.
Mhm.
So I should go through, and I could start by maybe counting the passport stamps. But good question that I cannot answer.
Fair enough. Um, and then Mary was asking, where did you stay along the Nagasaki Trail?
Oh, that's really an excellent thing to ask. Um, it's called the Nakasendo Way, and this is what happens. You In Japan, it's very civilized and populated, even when you're hiking in forests and stuff. So there are little villages you're coming across. You're crossing through little villages again and again periodically. So we stayed. I'm really glad we did at these really old, classic Japanese inns called ryokan, and in and of itself, just staying in one of these is wonderful, eye-opening thing because the sliding panels that divide up your room from for other rooms with rice paper, the meals where you're literally eating sitting on the floor and your legs are underneath a very flat, short table. um, you're sleeping on very well made futons. So every little bit of life in Japan is different. And I should add this. You may know this, but places like South Korea and Japan, the toilets are high tech. I'm sorry to introduce toilets, but toilets will, if you push the right button, heat up or steam or make little cover up noises and things. Remarkable. Anyway, thanks. Good question.
And then the other question was, where are you planning to go on your next trip?
Okay, love it. Excellent question. Well, because my wife and I, got to live in France, we ended up making um, a few French friends, and have stayed in touch. And France is the place that when we want to relax and when we want to kind of try to get um, a feeling back of what we loved about it, the great food and the beautiful villages, and of course the good wine. We go back there. So we we find Thanksgiving is a really, really good time to try. We don't have kids, and so we often travel overseas during Thanksgiving. And this time we're going back to visit some French friends, and we're going to try to have Thanksgiving dinner in France, in their way.
That sounds wonderful.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
so I think those were the big questions. I'm so sorry, anybody out there, if I missed one that came in the chat. But I do hope you will check out Peter's website, and thank you so much for providing your contact information there, so
Oh,
that if
no
folks
worries. No
if folks
worries.
want to email you. I will say, I very much appreciated the piece that you had done on the strip mall landscapes, because I grew up in Rhode Island, so seeing
Oh, so that's Route
The
2.
Warwick Mall, yeah, it's
That's
like,
Route 2. So
yeah.
you're where in Rhode Island did you grow up?
I grew up in Narragansett.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so
Yeah,
my wife's
yeah.
business partner lives down there now,
Okay,
but yeah,
yeah.
so that's Route 2, believe it or not.
So
Yep.
funny. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
thank you.
I'll have to look that piece up. That's very fun.
Thank you.
Um, and then, oh gosh, now there's more questions coming in, of course. So somebody asked about, do you speak other foreign languages, or do you speak French?
Okay, very good question. We okay, I would say that I should be better in French than I am. Um, in the 2.5 years we lived there, my wife was quite good because she worked with a number of French people. I got to the point where, yes, I can converse in French and I can order, stuff, okay, but I'm not as good as I should be. I can speak some Spanish as well, just having learned Spanish in school. I find, I don't know if others feel this, but I find that I keep confusing the little Spanish I know, with the little French I know, and using French words when I should be using Spanish. So that always is irritating to me. It's a flaw. Yeah.
All right. Let me just see if there was one more question. I believe somebody had asked about travel in Australia. Let me see if I can find the question again. Information about trips to Australia, or can you recommend any special groups that include trips to Urulu? I don't know if I'm
Hmm.
saying that right, but
Yeah, I don't know. So Australia is just it's not doesn't happen to me my one of my areas of so-called expertise, but I did do one piece I did there um for the Boston Globe was comparing the city of Melbourne, Australia to Boston. They're both second cities. They're both, full of people who are sort of intellectual. They both have the nation's top universities, and and they're old cities. So I kind of focused on Melbourne for that story, and so I can't answer. I can't be the person to give you advice on other parts of Australia. I could say this, that very much like visiting a far off Canada, and I think people forget how wonderful and smart and kind Canadians are, just like New Zealanders and Australians. But that's a non-answer.
That's all right. Unfortunately, on my end, I have to depart, but
Yes,
you
sure.
are getting so much praise, and I hope that folks will, again, reach out to you via email, with any further answers to these questions. This was an amazing presentation. As I said, I'm not a terribly well-traveled person, so you're inspiring me, and
Oh, great.
it sounds like the folks in the program, in the audience have more experience, and so I'm sure this was really eye-opening and enriching for
Oh,
them too. So
thank you so much. I really
yeah,
appreciate that, Marty,
yeah,
and everyone. Thank you so much. Have a
you're
good
welcome.
evening, and
Yes, thank
I'm
you
always
again.
always open to speaking at other libraries or other venues. So just shoot me an email.
Fantastic. All right, thank you everybody so much, and have a wonderful night, Peter.
Have a great night. Thanks.